The cruelest betrayals do not begin with hatred. They begin with gratitude that slowly turns into entitlement. The ballroom shimmered beneath enormous crystal chandeliers suspended from a ceiling nearly 30 feet high. Soft piano music floated through the air while executives, investors, and business leaders moved between tables dressed in tailored suits and elegant evening wear. Waiters carried silver trays through the crowd. Laughter echoed from every corner of the room. The annual celebration marked another record-breaking year for Bennett Global Holdings, one of the fastest-growing firms in the Pacific Northwest. At the center of it all stood Jason Bennett. Confident, admired, successful. Cameras followed him as he greeted investors. Employees smiled when he passed. Journalists waited for interviews. To most people in the room, Jason represented the American dream. A man who built success through intelligence, ambition, and relentless effort. Standing several feet away was Sophia Bennett. She wore a simple navy evening gown that reflected the soft golden light surrounding the ballroom. Her smile looked natural enough for photographs, but inside, she felt strangely disconnected from the celebration. For months, she had sensed something changing. Small things at first. Conversations becoming shorter. Business trips becoming longer. Decisions being made without her knowledge. The distance had grown so gradually that she almost convinced herself it was normal. Almost. Across the room, Jason raised a glass and tapped a spoon gently against the crystal. The sound echoed through the ballroom. Conversations stopped. Guests turned toward the stage. Employees smiled proudly. Investors settled into their seats. Everyone expected a speech celebrating another successful year. Sophia expected the same. Jason stepped beneath the spotlight. His smile appeared polished and practiced. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began. Applause followed. "This company has experienced extraordinary growth over the last few years. We have reached milestones many people believed were impossible." More applause. Sophia watched quietly from her table. Jason continued speaking about leadership, innovation, and vision. The audience listened attentively. Everything felt perfectly normal. Then something changed. His expression shifted slightly. Not enough for most people to notice. Enough for Sophia to feel it immediately. "Success often requires difficult decisions," Jason said. The room became quieter. "Sometimes we outgrow certain chapters of our lives. Sometimes we must leave behind what no longer aligns with our future." Sophia felt her stomach tighten. A strange silence settled around her. Jason looked directly toward her table. Hundreds of eyes followed his gaze. "Tonight," he said calmly, "I want to be honest about a personal decision. Sophia and I will be ending our marriage." The words landed with the force of a sudden storm. The ballroom froze. No music. No conversation. No movement. Just silence. Sophia sat perfectly still. Around her, guests exchanged shocked glances. Some looked embarrassed. Others looked fascinated. Nobody knew where to look. Jason continued speaking as though discussing a routine business matter. "Sophia has been part of my journey for many years, and I appreciate everything she has done. But people change. Priorities change. I believe we both deserve the opportunity to pursue lives that reflect who we have become." A few uncomfortable nods appeared throughout the audience. Sophia heard none of it. She was watching Jason, the man she had supported through 12 years of uncertainty. The man whose company once operated from a cramped office above a hardware store. The man she encouraged when investors rejected him. The man who once promised her they would build every success together. Jason smiled politely. "There is no conflict between us. Only different paths. Different paths." The phrase sounded clean, professional, convenient. It also erased 12 years of sacrifice with a single sentence. Sophia lowered her eyes briefly toward the untouched glass sitting in front of her. Reflections from the chandelier trembled across the surface. Around the room, whispers had already begun. She could feel them moving through the crowd. Questions. Assumptions. Speculation. Nobody knew the truth. Yet many already seemed prepared to decide what happened. Jason concluded his remarks and raised his glass. Applause arrived slowly, unevenly. uncomfortably. Then it grew stronger as people followed social instinct rather than genuine emotion. Sophia remained seated. She smiled politely when several guests glanced her way. Not because she felt calm, because dignity was the only thing she still controlled. A few minutes later, music returned. Conversations resumed. The event continued as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Investors approached Jason. Reporters requested comments. Employees congratulated him on his speech. Sophia noticed something unsettling. Very few people approached her. Not because they disliked her. Because most had already decided she belonged to the past. She stood quietly and walked toward the ballroom exit. No dramatic scene. No confrontation. No tears. Just a woman crossing a room full of people who suddenly looked through her instead of at her. Near the entrance, she paused briefly and looked back. Jason stood surrounded by influential guests. Smiling. Celebrating. Looking exactly like a man who believed he had just stepped into a brighter future. Sophia pushed through the doors and entered the cool night air outside. The city skyline stretched across the darkness beyond the hotel. Traffic lights reflected on rain-soaked streets. For several seconds, she stood alone beneath the entrance canopy while distant laughter drifted from the ballroom behind her. Then she heard something unexpected. Two executives exiting nearby spoke quietly, unaware she could hear them. "I always thought she was lucky to have him," one said. The other nodded. "Honestly, what does she do now?" Sophia closed her eyes for a moment. Not because the words hurt, because they revealed something far more important. The story had already been written in everyone's mind. Jason Bennett was the success. Sophia Bennett was the woman left behind. As a black luxury sedan disappeared into the Seattle night carrying her away from the hotel, neither Jason nor anyone else inside that ballroom could imagine how wrong that story would eventually become. The most powerful lies are not spoken by enemies. They are repeated by people who never bother asking for the truth. 3 weeks after the gala, Sophia Bennett sat alone in a small coffee shop overlooking Elliott Bay. Rain traced slow paths across the window beside her while commuters hurried along the sidewalks outside. Seattle moved at its usual pace. Ferries crossed the gray water. Office towers disappeared into low clouds. Life continued as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet everything in Sophia's world had changed. Newspapers had covered the divorce. Business blogs discussed it. Industry insiders exchanged theories. The story spread quickly because people love explanations, even when they invent them themselves. According to most versions, Jason Bennett had simply outgrown the marriage. Some described Sophia as a supportive spouse who struggled to keep up with his ambition. Others suggested she preferred a quieter life away from business. A few implied she had benefited from his success and now faced an uncertain future. None of them knew the truth. None of them knew that before Bennett Global Holdings occupied multiple floors inside a downtown skyscraper, it operated from a rented office barely large enough for 3 desks. None of them knew Sophia spent years helping build systems, managing operations, and solving problems that kept the company alive during its most fragile years. They only saw the finished product. People rarely notice the foundation beneath a building. They admire the view from the top. Across town, Jason's life appeared untouched. Interviews continued. Investors remained supportive. Invitations still arrived. If anything, public attention seemed to increase. The divorce had somehow strengthened the narrative surrounding him. He was now being portrayed as an ambitious leader entering a bold new chapter. Sophia watched it happen from a distance. Not with anger, with fascination. It amazed her how quickly people accepted convenient stories. Her phone vibrated on the table. A message from an old acquaintance appeared. "I heard about everything. I hope you are doing okay." Sophia stared at the screen for several seconds before placing the phone face down. The message sounded kind. Yet something about it felt strange. Nobody had asked what actually happened. They simply assumed she was the one who needed sympathy. That afternoon, she returned to the house she and Jason once shared. The legal process required several final documents and personal belongings to be collected. The driveway looked exactly the same. The landscaping remained perfectly maintained. The large windows reflected the cloudy sky overhead. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, everything felt different. Sophia walked through familiar rooms quietly. Family photographs had already disappeared from several walls. Decorative pieces had been rearranged. The house felt less like a home and more like a carefully staged property waiting for new owners. As she gathered boxes from a guest room closet, voices drifted from downstairs. Jason's mother had arrived unexpectedly. Sophia froze when she heard her speaking. Jason made the right decision, she said confidently. He needs someone who understands the world he lives in now. Another voice agreed. Sophia was never really part of that world. Sophia lowered her eyes. Not because the comments surprised her. Because they revealed how completely people misunderstood her. Never part of that world. The phrase echoed through her thoughts. She remembered nights spent reviewing business proposals. Weekends helping prepare investor presentations. Early mornings balancing budgets when the company could barely afford payroll. She remembered every sacrifice. Yet history had already been rewritten. A few minutes later, Sophia carried the final box toward the front door. Jason's mother noticed her immediately. Silence filled the room. Sophia, she said. I did not realize you were here. Sophia smiled politely. Just collecting the last of my things. An awkward pause followed. Then came the familiar expression. Pity disguised as kindness. I hope everything works out for you, Jason's mother said softly. Sophia nodded. Thank you. She could have explained. Could have defended herself. Could have listed every contribution she made over 12 years. But she understood something important. People only hear what fits the story they already believe. So she simply walked away. Later that evening, she carried the final box into her new apartment. The space was small compared to the house she left behind. 1 bedroom. 1 bathroom. A modest living room overlooking a grocery store parking lot. The furniture was simple. The walls mostly empty. Yet as she placed the box on the floor, an unexpected feeling settled over her. Relief. For the first time in years, nobody expected her to play a role. Nobody expected her to support someone else's dream. Nobody expected her to disappear behind another person's success. The apartment was quiet. Honest. Entirely hers. Sophia opened one of the boxes and began sorting through old files. Financial reports. Project plans. Meeting notes. Years of work carefully preserved inside folders. As she reviewed them, memories returned. Not memories of failure. Memories of capability. She had solved difficult problems before. Built systems before. Created opportunities before. Somewhere along the way, she had forgotten that those skills belonged to her, not her marriage. Outside the window, evening settled over the city. Cars moved through the parking lot below. Store signs illuminated the darkness. Sophia carried a notebook to the small kitchen table and sat down. The notebook remained blank for several moments. Then she wrote 3 simple words across the top of the page. New beginning plan. She stared at the words and smiled faintly. Across Seattle, everyone believed they already knew how her story ended. They imagined a woman left behind by success. A woman searching for direction. A woman trying to recover. None of them realized that while they were busy believing the lie, Sophia Bennett had just begun writing a completely different future. There is a moment in every comeback story when nobody applauds because nobody can see what is being built. That is the moment that matters most. 6 months after moving into the apartment above the grocery store, Sophia Bennett had developed a routine so predictable that even the cashier downstairs knew exactly when she would appear each morning. At 6:30, she bought black coffee. At 7, she sat at the small kitchen table beside the window. By 7:15, her laptop was open, notebooks were spread across the table, and another day had begun. The apartment remained simple. A couch. A bookshelf. A dining table that doubled as a workspace. Nothing about the place suggested success. Yet hidden inside those walls, something important was happening. Sophia was rebuilding herself. Every morning she studied. Financial strategy. Corporate acquisitions. leadership systems, market analysis. Industries she once understood only from the edges now became subjects she explored in depth. During her marriage, she spent years helping solve business problems. Now she wanted to understand every layer beneath them. She treated learning like a full-time job. Some days she worked 14 hours. Some days even longer. There were moments when doubt appeared unexpectedly. Usually late at night. Usually when the city outside became quiet. She would stare at spreadsheets, unfinished applications, and job listings while wondering whether everyone else had been right. Perhaps she had simply been a supporting character in someone else's success. Perhaps Jason had been the visionary all along. Then she would remember something. The company had nearly collapsed 3 different times during its early years. Each time she was the one who organized solutions. Each time she found ways to keep operations moving. Each time she stepped forward while others panicked. Those memories mattered because they reminded her of a truth she constantly fought to remember. Competence does not disappear because a marriage ends. One rainy afternoon, Sophia attended an interview with a consulting firm located 20 floors above downtown Seattle. The office overlooked Elliott Bay. The reception area displayed expensive artwork. Executives moved confidently through glass hallways carrying tablets and reports. The environment felt intimidating by design. The interview lasted less than 30 minutes. The managing partner reviewed her resume before looking up. "You spent years connected to Bennett Global," he said. "But most of your experience seems informal." Sophia nodded. "Many of my contributions happened behind the scenes." The man smiled politely. "That can be difficult to quantify." She understood the real meaning immediately. Difficult to quantify often meant impossible to verify. 40 minutes later, she was back on the street carrying another rejection, disguised as professionalism. The rain had intensified. Water collected along sidewalks. Traffic moved slowly through downtown intersections. Sophia stood beneath an awning and watched people rush toward office buildings. For a moment, she felt exhausted. Not physically. Emotionally. Starting over required patience. More patience than most people realized. Nobody celebrated effort before results appeared. A week later, another opportunity emerged. A small consulting company specializing in operational improvement needed temporary project support. The salary was modest. The position lacked prestige. Most experienced professionals would have ignored it. Sophia accepted immediately. The office occupied part of an aging brick building near Pioneer Square. The conference rooms were outdated. The furniture showed wear. The company employed fewer than 20 people. Yet something about the environment felt familiar. It reminded her of the early days before success changed everything. Her first assignment involved a struggling regional retailer facing declining performance. Senior consultants spent weeks analyzing the situation without identifying clear solutions. Sophia reviewed the same reports over a single weekend. Monday morning, she arrived carrying a notebook filled with observations. During the meeting, she quietly pointed out 3 operational issues nobody else had noticed. The room became silent. One consultant frowned. Another reviewed the data again. 10 minutes later, everyone realized she was correct. The managing director stared at her across the table. "How did you find this?" Sophia shrugged lightly. "I looked where the numbers stopped making sense." The answer sounded simple. Yet the room never forgot it. Over the following months, similar moments continued. A logistics problem. A staffing issue. An acquisition review. Again and again, Sophia identified patterns others overlooked. Clients began requesting her participation specifically. Managers noticed. Colleagues noticed. Gradually, her reputation started growing inside the company. Not because she demanded recognition. Because results made recognition unavoidable. One evening, after a particularly successful client presentation, Sophia remained alone in the office finishing reports. Outside the windows, city lights reflected across wet streets. Most employees had already gone home. The managing director approached her desk carrying 2 folders. "You know," he said, placing them down, "I have been trying to figure something out." Sophia looked up. "What is that?" He smiled. How someone with your skill set ended up applying for an entry-level consulting role. Sophia laughed softly. Life is complicated. That is one explanation. He tapped the folders. These are our two biggest projects next quarter. I want you leading analysis on both. Sophia looked at the folders. Then at him. Are you serious? Very. The managing director smiled again. Frankly, I think you have been underestimated for a very long time. After he left, Sophia remained seated for several seconds. The city glowed outside the windows. Traffic moved beneath towers of glass and steel. For the first time since the divorce, she felt something she had not allowed herself to feel before. Momentum. Not success. Not victory. Something more important. Direction. She gathered her things and prepared to leave. As she switched off the desk lamp, her phone vibrated with an unfamiliar email notification. The sender's name meant nothing to her at first. Then she read it again. Alexander Hayes Capital Partners, one of the most respected investment firms in the country. The message contained only a short request. Someone wanted to schedule a meeting. And without realizing it, Sophia Bennett had just reached the doorway to a future far larger than anything she imagined. Success rarely arrives with fireworks. More often, it enters quietly through a door that almost nobody notices. 3 days after receiving the unexpected email, Sophia Bennett stood inside the lobby of Alexander Hayes Capital Partners. The building occupied a prime location overlooking Elliott Bay. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Seattle skyline, while polished stone floors reflected the morning sunlight. Everything about the environment communicated precision, discipline, and influence. Executives crossed the lobby carrying tablets and portfolios. Reception staff greeted visitors with effortless professionalism. Sophia adjusted the sleeve of her blazer and glanced briefly at her reflection in the glass beside her. A year earlier, she would have entered the building feeling intimidated. Now she simply felt prepared. The receptionist guided her toward a private conference room on the 32nd floor. As the elevator climbed, the city slowly unfolded beneath her. Ferries moved across the water. Office towers stretched toward the clouds. Entire industries operated below, connected through decisions made inside buildings like this one. When the elevator doors opened, a senior assistant greeted her and escorted her down a quiet hallway. The conference room itself was surprisingly simple. No extravagant decorations. No unnecessary displays of wealth. Just a long table, a wall of windows, and several individuals reviewing documents. At the far end sat Alexander Hayes. Sophia immediately recognized him from business publications. Yet in person he looked different than expected. Less concerned with appearances. More focused. More observant. As she entered, he stood and offered a handshake. Sophia Bennett. Thank you for meeting with me. Please sit. The conversation began without small talk. Alexander slid a folder across the table. We have been following a retail restructuring project your consulting firm recently completed. Sophia glanced at the report. I worked on that assignment. You solved a problem 3 larger consulting groups failed to identify. Sophia smiled slightly. The data told a different story than their assumptions. Alexander nodded. Exactly. For the next hour, the discussion moved rapidly through business strategy, acquisitions, operational efficiency, and market expansion. Sophia noticed something unusual. Nobody in the room seemed interested in her divorce. Nobody referenced Jason Bennett. Nobody treated her like a former spouse attached to someone else's success. They evaluated only her ideas. Her analysis. Her ability to solve problems. It felt refreshing. Toward the end of the meeting, Alexander closed his notebook. Tell me something. Sophia looked up. All right. Why are you working at a small consulting company? The question hung in the air. Several executives looked toward her. Sophia considered her answer carefully. Because it was the opportunity available when I needed one. Alexander studied her expression. That is not the full answer. Sophia smiled. Probably not. A faint smile appeared on his face. I thought so. The meeting ended shortly afterward. As Sophia prepared to leave, Alexander walked her toward the elevator. You have an unusual perspective, he said. Most people analyze businesses from spreadsheets. And? You analyze them from experience. Sophia nodded. Experience teaches lessons spreadsheets miss. The elevator doors opened. Alexander handed her a business card. I would like to continue this conversation. Sophia accepted the card. I would like that too. Over the following months, the conversations continued. Sometimes by phone. Sometimes over coffee. Sometimes inside conference rooms where major decisions were discussed. Alexander never acted like a mentor. He treated Sophia as an equal participant whose ideas deserved consideration. That distinction changed everything. Gradually, new opportunities emerged. Investment firms sought operational reviews. Companies requested strategic recommendations. Sophia's reputation expanded beyond her consulting firm. Clients specifically requested her involvement. Executives remembered her insights. Recommendations spread from one boardroom to another. The woman many people assumed had been left behind was quietly becoming one of the most respected problem solvers in the region. One afternoon, nearly 2 years after the divorce, Sophia attended a strategy meeting involving a struggling manufacturing company. Senior advisors debated solutions for hours. Costs, staffing, expansion plans, market positioning. The discussion moved in circles. Finally, Alexander turned toward her. What are we missing? Sophia looked around the room. Then she pointed toward a section of the report. Everyone is trying to fix the symptoms. Silence followed. The actual problem is ownership structure. Until that changes, none of these solutions will matter. Several executives reviewed the documents again. Within minutes, the room shifted. Questions changed. Priorities changed. The entire strategy changed. After the meeting ended, one board member approached her. You just saved us 6 months. Sophia laughed softly. Hopefully more than that. Yet moments like this became increasingly common. Every project strengthened her reputation. Every success opened another door. Meanwhile, far across the city, Bennett Global Holdings continued growing. Jason Bennett appeared regularly in business magazines. Industry conferences welcomed him as a featured speaker. Publicly, everything looked perfect. But success often hides problems beneath the surface. And some of those problems had already begun developing where nobody could yet see them. Late one evening, Sophia returned to her apartment carrying a stack of reports. The grocery store below was closing for the night. Parking lot lights illuminated the pavement outside her window. She set the reports on the table and noticed an envelope resting beside her laptop. It had arrived earlier that day. The sender was Alexander Hayes Capital Partners. Curious, she opened it immediately. Inside was a formal proposal. Not for employment. Not for consulting. For partnership. Sophia read the document twice. Then a third time. Her pulse quickened. The opportunity represented something far larger than a promotion. It was a doorway into an entirely different world. A world where decisions shaped industries rather than individual projects. A world where ownership mattered more than titles. Sophia slowly looked out the window toward the distant lights of downtown Seattle. Somewhere beyond the skyline stood the company she once helped build. Somewhere beyond the skyline stood the man who believed she had been left behind. Neither of them knew it yet, but the distance between their futures was about to change forever. The people who change your life rarely arrive with promises. They arrive with opportunities that force you to discover who you really are. The partnership proposal remained on Sophia Bennett's kitchen table for 3 days before she signed it. Not because she doubted the opportunity. Because she understood the weight of it. For years, she had helped build someone else's vision. This was different. This invitation placed her in a position where her decisions would shape the future directly. Ownership carried responsibilities that titles never could. On the 4th morning, sunlight filtered through the apartment window as she signed the final page. The ink dried quickly. A simple signature. A simple moment. Yet Sophia sensed she had just crossed an invisible line separating her old life from the future waiting ahead. The transition happened gradually. At first, her role within Alexander Hayes Capital Partners focused on strategic evaluation. Companies seeking investment arrived with presentations, projections, and promises. Sophia studied each opportunity carefully. While many analysts focused on numbers alone, she paid attention to people, leadership quality, decision-making patterns, operational discipline. Years spent inside growing businesses taught her that spreadsheets only revealed part of the story. Alexander noticed immediately. During one investment review, a technology startup impressed nearly everyone in the room. Revenue projections looked strong. Market interest appeared promising. Executives expressed enthusiasm. Then Alexander turned toward Sophia. "What do you think?" The room became quiet. Sophia glanced at her notes. "I think their growth model depends entirely on one executive." Several people looked surprised. She continued. "If that person leaves, the company loses most of its operational knowledge." Silence followed. 2 weeks later, additional reviews confirmed her concern. The investment was rejected. 6 months afterward, the company collapsed for exactly that reason. Moments like that built trust. Not overnight, but steadily, predictably. As months became years, Sophia's influence expanded. New partnerships formed. Existing companies improved. Acquisitions generated strong returns. More importantly, the culture around her remained different from anything she experienced before. People respected contribution rather than image, results rather than reputation. One evening after a successful board meeting, Sophia and Alexander remained in the conference room overlooking downtown Seattle. The city sparkled beneath thousands of lights. Traffic flowed through illuminated streets. Ferries crossed dark water below. Most employees had already gone home. Alexander closed a financial report and leaned back slightly. "Do you know what impressed me the first time we met?" Sophia smiled. "My presentation?" "No," she laughed. "Then what?" Alexander looked toward the skyline. "You never talked about what happened to you." Sophia considered the statement. Most people already knew. "Exactly." He looked back at her. "Everyone else talked about your divorce. You talked about solutions." The words lingered in the quiet room. Sophia realized he was right. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped defining herself through loss. The divorce became part of her history rather than her identity. That shift changed everything. Meanwhile, across Seattle, Bennett Global Holdings continued expanding. Jason Bennett remained a respected figure within the business community. Industry publications featured interviews. Conferences requested appearances. Publicly, his career looked stronger than ever. Yet beneath the surface, subtle challenges had begun emerging. Increased competition, rising operational costs, investor pressure. None of it threatened the company immediately, but cracks had started appearing. Sophia occasionally noticed references to Bennett Global inside market reports crossing her desk. She never lingered on them, never asked questions, never followed updates. The company belonged to her past, or so she believed. One afternoon, nearly 5 years after the divorce, Alexander invited Sophia to participate in a confidential acquisition review. The target company remained unnamed until the meeting began. As executives gathered around the conference table, digital presentations illuminated large screens. Financial summaries appeared. Revenue reports followed. Then the company logo appeared. Bennett Global Holdings. Sophia remained perfectly still. No reaction. No visible emotion. Yet memories surfaced immediately. The tiny office above the hardware store. The late-night planning sessions. The years spent building systems from scratch. Across the table, Alexander observed her carefully. "You okay?" Sophia nodded once. "Of course." The presentation continued. Market conditions had weakened the company's position. Growth had slowed. Several strategic mistakes created vulnerabilities. Larger firms were beginning to take notice. By the end of the meeting, one possibility became increasingly clear. Bennett Global could become an acquisition target within the next few years. As executives discussed options, Sophia listened quietly. Not because the information hurt, because it felt surreal. The company she once helped build had become just another file in a conference room. Just another opportunity under evaluation. Life had a strange sense of irony. After the meeting ended, Sophia walked alone through downtown Seattle. Evening sunlight reflected from glass towers overhead. Pedestrians filled the sidewalks. Restaurants prepared for dinner crowds. The city felt alive. She stopped briefly beside a storefront window and studied her reflection. The woman staring back looked nothing like the person who left the gala years ago. Confidence had replaced uncertainty. Experience had replaced self-doubt. Success had arrived quietly, one decision at a time. Her phone vibrated. A message from Alexander appeared. "Dinner tomorrow. We need to discuss something important." Sophia smiled slightly and slipped the phone back into her pocket. Alexander rarely used words casually. Important usually meant significant. Very significant. As she continued walking through the city, she had no way of knowing that the next conversation would place her on a path leading directly back toward the company she once left behind. And this time, she would not be returning as someone's wife. She would be returning with something far more powerful. Power changes people. But true power reveals who they have been all along. The dinner with Alexander Hayes took place at a private restaurant overlooking Lake Union. Large windows reflected the city lights across the water, while quiet conversations filled the elegant dining room. The atmosphere felt relaxed, yet Sophia Bennett sensed immediately that this meeting carried unusual significance. Alexander rarely scheduled private dinners to discuss routine matters. As they reviewed market trends and current investments, he appeared more thoughtful than usual. Finally, he placed his glass down and looked directly at her. "I have a question." Sophia smiled. "Only one." A faint laugh crossed his face. "For now." She nodded. "Go ahead." Alexander folded his hands. "What do you want?" The question seemed simple. Yet Sophia understood it was anything but simple. For years she would have answered differently. Security. Stability. A chance to start over. Now she took her time. "Freedom," she said eventually. Alexander studied her expression. "Explain." "The ability to build something meaningful without needing permission from anyone else." Silence followed. Then Alexander smiled. "Good answer." The conversation shifted toward future opportunities. New acquisitions. Expansion strategies. Emerging industries. Yet beneath every topic existed a larger theme. Growth. Not just financial growth. Personal growth. Leadership growth. Ownership. Several weeks later, Alexander officially announced Sophia's promotion to equity partner. The news traveled quickly through the firm. Congratulations arrived from executives, clients, and investors throughout the country. Sophia accepted them graciously. Yet later that evening, she sat alone in her apartment and reflected on how far she had come. The grocery store below still closed at 10 every night. The parking lot lights still illuminated her window. The apartment itself remained largely unchanged. She could afford something larger now. Something far more impressive. Yet she stayed. The space reminded her where rebuilding began. It reminded her never to take progress for granted. Over the next 3 years, the firm's growth accelerated dramatically. Strategic acquisitions expanded operations across multiple states. New partnerships generated exceptional returns. Several struggling businesses transformed into success stories under Sophia's guidance. Industry publications began mentioning her name regularly. Conference invitations arrived. Leadership panels requested her participation. She accepted some, declined others. Public attention no longer felt important. Results mattered more. One spring morning, Sophia stood inside a conference center in Chicago preparing to deliver a presentation on corporate transformation. Hundreds of executives filled the auditorium. Screens illuminated the stage. Reporters occupied seats near the front. As she adjusted her notes, a familiar company logo appeared on a sponsor banner across the room. Bennett Global Holdings. Sophia paused briefly. Not because she felt emotional. Because she had not thought about the company in months. During a networking reception later that afternoon, she overheard several executives discussing recent challenges facing the firm. Rising debt. Competitive pressure. Leadership concerns. Nothing catastrophic. yet enough to attract attention from investors and acquisition groups. Sophia listened quietly before continuing toward another conversation. The information remained in the back of her mind. Nothing more. Months later, inside a boardroom at Alexander Hayes Capital Partners, that same company appeared once again. Financial reports covered the conference table. Analysts reviewed market trends. Investment advisors discussed strategic opportunities. Bennett Global Holdings had officially entered a category many firms watched closely. Vulnerable. Not failing. Not collapsing. Vulnerable. Alexander stood near the screen displaying financial projections. Several groups are evaluating positions, he explained. Most believe the company still has value if managed correctly. Sophia reviewed the reports in front of her. Familiar patterns emerged almost immediately. Operational inefficiencies. Poor integration decisions. Expansion mistakes. Problems she recognized because she had solved similar issues years ago. One executive looked toward her. Thoughts? Sophia remained silent for several seconds. Then she spoke. The company is stronger than people think. Several analysts looked surprised. She continued. The foundation remains solid. The problem is leadership focus. Alexander nodded slowly. Interesting. The discussion continued for nearly 2 hours. By the end, one conclusion became clear. Bennett Global Holdings represented a serious acquisition opportunity. Not immediately, but soon. Very soon. Later that evening, Alexander invited Sophia into his office overlooking downtown Seattle. The skyline glowed beneath a fading sunset. Ferries crossed Elliott Bay in the distance. The city looked peaceful from 30 stories above the streets. Alexander handed her a file. I want you leading preliminary analysis. Sophia accepted the folder. She already knew what it contained. You are serious. Very. There are dozens of people who could do this. Alexander smiled slightly. No, he shook his head. There is exactly one person who understands that company from the inside and the outside. Sophia looked down at the file. Years ago, she left Bennett Global through the front doors carrying a small box of personal belongings. She remembered the feeling clearly. The loneliness. The uncertainty. The assumption that chapter had ended forever. Now life was presenting something almost impossible to imagine. A path leading directly back toward the company she helped build. Not as an employee. Not as a spouse. Not as someone seeking validation. Something entirely different. Alexander stepped toward the window. One more thing. Sophia looked up. What? He smiled. There is an industry leadership conference next month. And? Jason Bennett will be there. The room became quiet. Not uncomfortable. Just thoughtful. Sophia glanced once more at the acquisition file resting in her hands. The future suddenly felt closer than ever. Somewhere in Seattle, Jason Bennett continued believing the story he told himself years ago. The story where he moved forward and Sophia remained behind. Neither of them knew it yet, but their paths were about to cross again. This time under circumstances neither could have predicted. And when that moment arrived, the balance of power would look very different than it did on the night everything fell apart. Some reunions are planned. Others are arranged by fate with perfect timing. The leadership conference occupied an entire luxury resort outside Denver, Colorado. Executives from across the country filled the property. Private meetings took place behind closed doors. Networking events stretched late into the evening. Major partnerships often began with conversations held in hallways rather than boardrooms. For 3 days, some of the most influential business leaders in America would gather beneath one roof. Sophia Bennett arrived early on the first morning. Mountain sunlight poured through enormous glass walls overlooking distant peaks. Guests crossed the lobby carrying conference materials and coffee cups. The atmosphere felt energetic, ambitious, familiar. Yet for Sophia, this conference carried a different significance. Somewhere inside the resort was Jason Bennett. Their paths had not crossed in years. Not once. She had seen occasional interviews. Read a few industry articles. Nothing more. Their lives had traveled in separate directions. Or at least that was true until now. Sophia checked into her suite and reviewed the conference schedule. Several speaking engagements appeared throughout the event. Investor roundtables, strategic planning sessions, industry panels. Her name appeared among featured presenters. A decade earlier, that detail would have felt impossible. Now it simply felt like another responsibility. Later that morning, she entered a ballroom where hundreds of attendees gathered for the opening keynote. Rows of tables filled the space. Screens illuminated the stage. Conversations echoed beneath high ceilings. As Sophia walked toward her assigned seat near the front, she noticed subtle reactions around the room. People recognized her. Executives nodded politely. Investors waved. Several attendees approached briefly to introduce themselves. Respect followed her now, not because she demanded attention, because she earned it. Across the ballroom, another group had begun noticing the same thing. Jason Bennett stood speaking with several corporate leaders when he caught sight of her. For a brief moment, he thought he was mistaken. Then Sophia turned slightly and recognition settled across his face. 5 years. That was how long it had been. 5 years since the divorce. 5 years since the gala. 5 years since he convinced himself he was leaving the past behind. Yet there she was. Calm. Confident. Moving comfortably through a room filled with influential people. Jason watched as several executives greeted her warmly. One investor even left an ongoing conversation to shake her hand. Something about the scene felt unexpected. Not because he doubted her intelligence. Because he never imagined her operating at this level. The keynote session began. Throughout the presentation, Jason occasionally found himself looking toward the front rows where Sophia sat taking notes. She looked focused, professional, entirely comfortable. The contrast unsettled him more than he cared to admit. During a networking break, their paths finally crossed. Neither had planned it. The resort's central courtyard connected multiple conference spaces, creating unavoidable intersections throughout the day. Sophia stepped outside carrying a coffee when she heard a familiar voice. Sophia. She turned. Jason stood several feet away. Time seemed to pause briefly. Not dramatically. Just long enough to acknowledge history. Then Sophia smiled politely. Jason. It has been a while. It has. The conversation felt surprisingly natural. Neither awkward nor emotional. Simply two people who once shared a life and now shared only memories. Jason glanced toward the conference center. I saw your name on the speaker list. Sophia nodded. I have a panel tomorrow. Impressive. She smiled lightly. Thank you. Jason hesitated. I did not realize you were working with Alexander Hayes Capital. I am. The answer was simple. Yet, something shifted in his expression. He knew exactly how significant that firm had become. Everyone in the industry did. That is quite an accomplishment. We have been fortunate. Jason laughed softly. The phrase sounded familiar. Modest. Controlled. Almost identical to how she answered difficult questions years earlier. Around them, attendees moved between sessions. Conversations continued. Yet neither immediately ended the exchange. Finally, Jason asked, How have you been? Sophia looked toward the mountains beyond the resort. Good. She paused briefly. Very good. The sincerity of the answer surprised him. Not because he expected bitterness. Because she genuinely seemed happy. There was no performance. No attempt to prove anything. Just quiet certainty. For reasons he could not explain, that affected him more than success ever could. Before either could continue, another executive approached. Sophia, there you are. The man greeted her enthusiastically. The acquisition panel wants to review tomorrow's materials. I will be there in a few minutes. The executive nodded and walked away. Jason watched the interaction carefully. You seem busy. Sophia laughed softly. Sometimes. A brief silence followed. Then she extended her hand. It was good seeing you, Jason. He shook it. You too. Sophia continued toward the conference center. Jason remained where he stood, watching her disappear into the crowd. Something felt different now. Not about Sophia. About himself. For years he viewed the divorce as a turning point where one life advanced and another struggled to catch up. That narrative no longer fit reality. Across the next 2 days, he saw evidence everywhere. Executives requesting meetings with her. Investors seeking her opinion. Industry leaders introducing colleagues. By the final afternoon, a realization became impossible to ignore. Sophia Bennett was no longer connected to influence. She was influence. On the conference's closing day, attendees gathered for a private investment forum. Admission was limited. Only select executives and partners received invitations. Jason attended as a corporate representative. Sophia attended as something else entirely. As discussions began, confidential acquisition opportunities appeared on presentation screens. One company name caused immediate interest throughout the room. Bennett Global Holdings. Jason sat upright. Across the table, Sophia remained calm. Almost too calm. And as investors began discussing future possibilities surrounding the company he spent years building, Jason experienced an unfamiliar feeling. For the first time, he realized Sophia Bennett might know something he did not. And the answer was getting closer with every passing day. The truth rarely arrives with a speech. Sometimes it enters a room disguised as a business decision. 2 months after the conference in Colorado, a private meeting took place inside the headquarters of Alexander Hayes Capital Partners. The boardroom overlooked Elliott Bay. Morning sunlight reflected across the water while executives reviewed acquisition reports spread across a polished walnut table. Financial analysts presented projections. Legal teams reviewed documentation. Investment advisors discussed strategic outcomes. At the center of every discussion sat one company, Bennett Global Holdings. Years of expansion had created impressive growth, but recent decisions weakened the organization's position. Revenue remained strong. Brand recognition remained valuable. Yet operational inefficiencies continued increasing. Investors had become concerned. Market pressure continued building. The opportunity was clear. So was the timing. Sophia Bennett listened quietly as presentations continued. By now, she understood every corner of the company. Not only because of the reports in front of her, because she remembered helping build the foundation beneath them. Finally, Alexander looked around the room. "We are ready to vote." Silence settled across the table. One by one, board members expressed support. When the final vote concluded, the result was unanimous. The acquisition would move forward. Several executives exchanged satisfied smiles. Others immediately began discussing implementation plans. Sophia remained calm. The moment felt important, but not for the reasons anyone else understood. 5 years earlier, she left the company carrying a cardboard box through the front entrance. Today, she was returning as part owner of the organization acquiring it. Life had completed a circle nobody could have predicted. Within days, confidential negotiations began. Lawyers exchanged documents. Financial teams reviewed disclosures. Advisors prepared transition plans. Most employees at Bennett Global remained unaware. Even senior leadership possessed limited information. Yet rumors started spreading. Rumors always appeared before announcements. Inside Bennett Global headquarters, uncertainty grew. Jason Bennett noticed it immediately. Questions arrived from investors. Board members requested additional meetings. Analysts asked unusual questions during earnings reviews. Something was changing. He could feel it. One afternoon, Jason sat inside his office overlooking downtown Seattle reviewing acquisition speculation published by a financial publication. Several firms were mentioned. One name appeared repeatedly. Alexander Hayes Capital Partners. Jason leaned back in his chair. The connection immediately brought another thought. Sophia. He stared through the office window toward the skyline. For the first time, a possibility entered his mind that previously seemed impossible. What if she was involved? The question lingered throughout the day. Meanwhile, preparations continued quietly behind the scenes. Weeks later, the official announcement arrived. Bennett Global Holdings would enter a strategic acquisition agreement led by Alexander Hayes Capital Partners. Financial networks reported the news immediately. Industry publications published analysis within hours. Investors reacted positively. Employees reacted with uncertainty. Executives reacted with concern. Emergency meetings filled conference rooms throughout headquarters. By the following week, leadership teams gathered for a formal transition presentation. The largest auditorium inside Bennett Global headquarters had been prepared for the occasion. Hundreds of employees filled the seats. Senior executives occupied front rows. Board members gathered near the stage. Jason sat among them reviewing printed materials. The atmosphere felt tense, curious, uncertain. Large screens displayed acquisition details while conversations echoed throughout the room. Then the lights dimmed. The presentation began. Alexander Hayes stepped onto the stage first. Polite applause followed. He discussed growth opportunities, future investments, and long-term strategy. Employees listened carefully. Executives took notes. Everything appeared routine. Then Alexander smiled slightly and looked toward the side entrance. Before we continue, I would like to introduce someone who played an important role in bringing this partnership together. The room became quiet. Jason looked up. The side doors opened. Sophia Bennett walked onto the stage. For several seconds, nobody reacted. Recognition moved slowly through the audience like a wave. Employees exchanged confused glances. Senior managers sat upright. Board members stared. Jason remained completely still. Sophia crossed the stage with calm confidence and joined Alexander beneath the lights. There was no dramatic expression. No triumph. No arrogance. Just quiet professionalism. Alexander waited for the room to settle. Then he continued. As equity partner and strategic acquisition lead, Sophia Bennett will oversee operational integration moving forward. Silence. Complete silence. Several employees looked from Sophia to Jason and back again. Others appeared genuinely stunned. A few older executives recognized her immediately from the company's earliest years. The realization spread rapidly. The woman many people forgot. The woman many assumed had disappeared after the divorce. The woman once viewed as an accessory to someone else's success. She was now standing on stage helping lead the future of the company. Jason felt the weight of the moment settle around him. Memories surfaced unexpectedly. The tiny office above the hardware store. The years she spent solving problems. The sacrifices nobody else saw. The contributions people conveniently forgot. Suddenly, those memories looked different. Not because the past changed. Because the truth finally stood where everyone could see it. Sophia accepted the microphone. The room remained silent. Hundreds of eyes followed her. She could have mentioned history. Could have referenced the divorce. Could have reminded everyone what happened years earlier. Instead, she smiled politely and said something far simpler. I am honored to help build the next chapter of this company. Thank you for being here. That was all. No revenge. No bitterness. No performance. Just dignity. And somehow, that made the moment even more powerful. Then something unexpected happened. One employee stood and applauded. Another followed. Then another. Within seconds, the entire auditorium rose to its feet. Applause filled the room. Not polite applause. Genuine applause. The kind that cannot be manufactured. The kind that comes from recognition. Sophia stood quietly beneath the lights while hundreds of employees acknowledged something they finally understood. The story they believed for years had never been the complete story. And in the front row, Jason Bennett watched as the truth changed everything. The loudest victories are often the ones that require no celebration at all. The applause inside the auditorium continued for several moments before gradually fading. Employees returned to their seats. Executives exchanged quiet remarks. Investors reviewed notes with new understanding. Yet the atmosphere had changed permanently. The acquisition was no longer simply a business transaction. It had become something deeper. A correction. A truth finally visible after years of being ignored. Sophia Bennett remained composed as the presentation concluded. She answered questions about integration plans, operational goals, and future opportunities. Her voice stayed calm, professional, focused entirely on the future. Anyone expecting bitterness found none. Anyone expecting revenge found none. The meeting eventually ended. Employees gathered in small groups throughout the building discussing what they had witnessed. Many remembered Sophia from the early years. Others knew her only through stories. Now they understood how incomplete those stories had been. As people slowly exited the auditorium, Jason Bennett remained seated for several seconds longer than everyone else. The room emptied around him. Conversations faded into distant hallways. Large presentation screens powered down one by one. He stared toward the stage where Sophia had stood only minutes earlier. 5 years suddenly felt very short. And very long. Eventually he stood and left the auditorium. The hallways buzzed with activity. Transition teams moved between conference rooms. Executives prepared for additional meetings. The company was entering a new chapter. One he never expected. Later that afternoon, Sophia stood alone near a window overlooking Seattle. The skyline stretched across the horizon beneath soft afternoon sunlight. Ferries crossed Elliott Bay. Traffic moved steadily through downtown streets. The city looked almost identical to the one she remembered years ago. Yet, she felt entirely different. A quiet knock interrupted her thoughts. She turned. Jason stood near the doorway. Neither spoke immediately. The silence felt respectful rather than uncomfortable. Finally, Jason stepped inside. "Do you have a minute?" Sophia nodded. "Of course." He closed the door gently behind him. For a moment, he looked toward the city outside the window. Then back at her. "I owe you an apology." Sophia remained silent. Not because she wanted to hear it. Because she wanted him to finish. Jason exhaled slowly. "For years I convinced myself that success belonged mostly to me." His voice carried none of the confidence people associated with him. "I told myself a lot of stories. Stories that made difficult choices easier to justify." Sophia listened quietly. But sitting in that auditorium today, he paused. "I realized how much I ignored." The room remained still. No dramatic music. No emotional confrontation. Just honesty arriving years late. Jason lowered his eyes briefly. "You contributed far more than I ever acknowledged." Sophia looked out toward the skyline again. "We were both different people back then." "Maybe." Jason nodded. "But that does not change the truth." Another silence followed. This one felt lighter. As though old weight had finally found a place to rest. After several moments, Sophia smiled gently. "Thank you." Nothing more. No lecture. No reminder of the pain. No attempt to make him feel guilty. Just gratitude for honesty. Jason laughed softly. "That is all you have to say?" Sophia smiled. "What else is there?" For the first time, he truly understood something that had escaped him for years. She was not standing here because she won against him. She was standing here because she never stopped building herself. The difference mattered. More than he could explain. As evening approached, the building gradually emptied. Employees headed home. Meetings concluded. Lights began turning off across various floors. Sophia gathered her things and prepared to leave. Before stepping into the elevator, she glanced once more across the office space. Teams were already discussing improvements. New ideas. New opportunities. The company would continue evolving. That was the nature of business. And of life. Downstairs, a black sedan waited near the entrance. The driver opened the door. Sophia paused before getting inside. Across the street, the setting sun reflected from glass towers throughout downtown Seattle. Gold light washed across the city. Beautiful. Quiet. Earned. Her phone vibrated with a message from Alexander Hayes. "Successful first day?" Sophia smiled and typed a simple reply. "Very." She placed the phone away and looked out the window as the car pulled into traffic. Years earlier, she had left this company feeling invisible. Forgotten. Misunderstood. Tonight she left knowing none of those things mattered anymore. Validation had arrived, but she no longer needed it. Recognition had arrived, but she no longer chased it. Success had arrived, but it was never the destination. The destination was freedom. The freedom to become exactly who she was capable of becoming. As the city lights began illuminating the evening skyline, Sophia watched them appear one by one. Somewhere behind her stood the company she once helped build. Somewhere behind her stood the life she thought she lost. Yet neither defined her anymore. The most remarkable part of her journey was not that she returned stronger. It was that she discovered her value had never depended on being chosen by someone else. It had always existed within her. The truth that changed everything was not that she eventually owned part of the company. The truth was far simpler. She never needed the company to prove who she was. And in the end, she did not win him back. She won herself.